third lie of grief, I'm going to be looking at this thing that happens to us when something goes wrong in our lives, when we're heartbroken, when we are grieving, when we are sad, whether that's because of bereavement, a breakup, a job loss, whatever it is that you're impacted by. There is this automatic thing that happens to a lot of us. If this hasn't happened to you, then great, but to most people that I come across, they can relate to this on some level. And this is the lie whereby people presume and believe that you are best left alone. It's kind of that thing that people do where they say to themselves, oh, we better not go and disturb so and so because they're going through a really bad time. And so it's through this goodwill or this thought that people have that this terrible thing happens to us and that we're left alone. Now, a lot of people will argue with me over this one because they might say to me, oh, but I love being on my own and I really don't want to be around people when something bad has happened to me. And my response to that is that you have learned that you have been taught very well since you were young to be alone. Therefore, it is your natural response and that is what feels normal, and so that's what you do. Now, that's separate to taking time by yourself and having some time alone in nature, going for walks, all of those healthy things that we do by ourselves. But I'm not talking about abject isolation and removing yourself, being alone, sort of just binge watching stuff or drinking or smoking or just isolating, not answering your phone, maybe avoiding going out, because those are not great things to do, and yet they are the responses that are people's go-to when something bad has happened. I just want you to think about this for a minute. If you were happy and you had some great news, what's the first thing that you would want to do? And I suggest that is that you would phone up your friends or your family or someone close to you, call them up and say, hey, guess what? Just got the most amazing news. And then you'd share it. And those that you love would celebrate with you and they'd be happy for you. Now, what would happen if you had some bad news? I bet you wouldn't make that phone call. Or if you do, it would be a very much a fix-it phone call where people would probably interject and try and cheer you up and make you look on the bright side, or any number of those other lies that we've looked at, numbers 1 and 2 last week, which is that don't feel bad, plenty more fish in the sea, don't feel bad, something good's around the corner, don't feel bad, he or she wasn't good enough for you, all of that stuff that people do. But once that initial phone call or 2 phone calls has happened and you're still not sort of jollied up and back to normal as if nothing has happened, often people don't know what to do, and so there is this thing whereby they don't call you as much, but also if they do, you don't really want to talk to them because on some level you don't want to be told, cheer up, plenty more fish in the sea, or never mind, at least they're not in pain anymore, or whatever their sort of cheer up method is, or whatever advice they're giving you, you won't want to hear it. And so because every time that you try and talk and you want to be heard, you kind of get fixed or told or advised, you don't want to talk anymore. You just kind of stop and I kind of put this cork in and you swallow it, and then you start to isolate. And this is where the real danger happens, because grievers and people that are heartbroken are not meant to be alone, nor are you meant to be fixed. So if you haven't read my blog on Friday, I wrote a blog about this very subject, because what's meant to happen is, just as you would call a friend in good news, you're supposed to be calling a friend in bad news, and within that you still get included. There is no fixing, there is no you know, cheering up and looking on the bright side, and they wouldn't want you to be unhappy, and all of that stuff that people do out of goodwill, I would add. But it doesn't help when it comes to emotional health. Those are all intellectual mind responses that are very unhelpful for our heart. So it's about including that person in whatever it is you're doing, just as if they're giving you good news, but without fixing them. So they're still included, and they can either talk about their problem if they want to or not, or you could just be there, but also, you know, just incorporate them in what you're doing. It's okay for them to be sad. It's not a case of them, it's not okay. You can't be okay if they're not, or you know, they need to be okay, they need to just be okay. But you know, there is this thing about it's okay to not be okay, and it really, really is okay to not be okay. And the more that you're accepted about being not okay, the more this natural thing happens where you move through it and you stop getting stuck. And you know, this is very much a learned response to loss, a learned response to heartbreak, and it goes back to childhood, because when we look at what babies do or toddlers do when they're hurting, they fall over, they get back up, they put their arms out to mum or dad, and they get a hug, and then they get put down, and then they run off, and then they might fall over and they come back, and their first response is not to go off and hide. Their first response is arms out to their carer, to their mum or their dad, and get a hug. And that's exactly what we're still supposed to do. It's just that somewhere between toddler and adulthood that got lost, and it's usually gotten lost in those years where maybe you didn't listen to mum or dad, and you made a mistake, or you went against their advice. Even something as innocuous as, you know, you banged your head on the table and you'd been told to stop running around, and then what, you go for the natural hug, but this time you get told, I told you not to do that, and then there's this anger that comes back at you because you were told not to. So rather than it being a hug first and then maybe a chat later saying, hey, you know, didn't we discuss the table, you know, it's, be careful, it's sharp edges, or just don't run so fast in the house, let's save that for outside, or whatever that teaching is, rather than it being a cross, angry shun, which isn't helpful. This is where we start to learn that if something's gone wrong, whether that's a romantic mistake or just a romance or whatever's gone wrong, that suddenly we think that we're going to be judged, we're going to be told off, or we're not going to be liked, we're not going to fit in. We have to put this mask on and just pretend everything's okay. I mean, there's so many parts to this lie that just pervade so many aspects of our lives. So I really wanted to just kind of stimulate some ideas here and get you to really think about why it is you're alone, or why it is you avoid those that are grieving and sad. You know, why are you not asking if they're okay, with full permission that if they say they don't want to talk about it, that that's okay.